Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the 2025 ST Education Forum in partnership with SMU. As Jasmine has already mentioned, this is really a very special edition of the ST Education Forum. 10th edition, ST 180th birthday, SG 60, and SMU 25th. For such an occasion, we do need a special topic. There are lots of reasons for us to celebrate our collective achievements, and also an opportune time for us to reflect on what lies ahead. There you see why we have chosen our shared future as this year's topic. Nothing more important. But future is not just about time. Future is also about place. And that's why we have decided to start at where we are, Southeast Asia, where opportunities and challenges await. We are truly grateful to the DPM Heng, to be our guest of honor today to share his thoughts. We are also grateful to have a distinguished panel, including to my left, Mr. Aaron Tan, as you have already heard, founder and CEO of Caro, and what is even more important, actually a lot more important, an SMU alumnus. So thank you very much, Aaron. Mr. Piyush Gupta needs no introduction. You have been reading quite a lot about him in the press of late. CEO of DBS Bank and chairman of SMU Board of Trustees. Last but not least, Mr. Audi Hariopratomo. How should I describe Audi? Entrepreneur extraordinaire, and also investor who is really seriously reshaping Indonesia's health and creative industries. So we are really, really grateful to all of you for joining us today. There will be time for discussion, but at this point, I have the privilege of inviting DBM Heng to first share his thoughts on today's topic. DBM, please.
Well, thank you, Alan. And I'm very happy to see so many of you here, including many young students right at the front. Now, first I want to congratulate ST and SMU, ST on your 180th anniversary, and to SMU for the 25th anniversary. Now, I wasn't born when ST was first published. Really? Maybe in my previous incarnation. But I was working in the Ministry of Education after 15 years as a policeman to be the first director of our higher education, working with Dr. Tony Tan. And one of the first piece of work that I was given was to work with Dr. Tan to set up SMU. So I went and so I played a tiny role, including going to speak to Mr. Ho Kwon Ping to say, would you chair SMU? And Kwon Ping's condition was, yes, I would, provided it is in the city. So now you have the most expensive campus of all universities. So congratulations on SMU for your achievements over the last 25 years, and also to ST and SMU for partnering to do this education forum on your 10th anniversary. I don't know whether you have insider information or you had the perfect foresight, but to have a topic on Southeast Asia and our shared future in this most tumultuous time is just absolutely timely and appropriate. So let me first touch on, I'm very glad also to be with Piyush, Audi, and Professor Alan Chan and Aaron on this panel. So let me first start by talking about, first what is Southeast Asia, and then what has been our shared past and what will be our shared future. Now, this year's theme on ASEAN and shared future, we had to first think about what is Southeast Asia. Now, Southeast Asia is actually very, very diverse. Very diverse in terms of land size, GDP, culture, heritage, religion, and so on. And given this diversity, if you look back in the past on what was our shared future, the early 60s, when I was born, was not a good period. There was a Vietnam War going on, there was confrontation, there was Cambodia at that time, Cambodia and all the war. But I will say that in the last 3.5 decades, we have made huge progress. And one big part of it is the turn to economic development as a very central pillar of ASEAN's work. And I think that had turned out to be a critical turning point for Southeast Asian nations, that our ability to do that. I played a very small role in that. I was the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Trade and Industry when I was negotiating with my fellow permanent secretaries across ASEAN to do the blueprints for the ASEAN Economic Community. And in fact, it was my fellow PERMSECs in ASEAN who were most forward-looking and said, well, let us put the best possible idea for creating a single market, a single production base, one integrated region, because we need to be integrated to be stronger. And that has been a big, big growth factor for ASEAN. So if you look at the data on how ASEAN has grown, in 1998, during the Asian financial crisis, right, our GDP was 4.6% of the world's, about 500 billion. Today is $3.8 trillion, or 6.3% of the world. So we have grown not only in absolute terms, but as a percentage of global GDP. And as Jamie mentioned earlier, we're now the fifth, as a group, we are the fifth largest in the world. And if we get our acts right, we can aspire to be the fourth largest. So hundreds of millions of people in ASEAN have been uplifted with this economic growth. And it's something which I think we must continue to focus on. And I would say that our ASEAN trade agreements have played a very critical role in this. So that is my first point. And I think our intra-ASEAN trade have grown, our intra-ASEAN investments have also grown. So my first point is that if we look back at the past, ASEAN's shared future, when we are embroiled in conflict, in contestation, it benefited nobody. But when we put our minds to work on cooperation, to work on how we can strengthen cooperation across ASEAN, I think we all emerge as winners. So peace and stability is critical to economic development, is critical to uplifting the lives of our people. Now, my second point is that I'm glad that very early on we recognize ASEAN is a very diverse, very, very diverse region. And in religion, culture, heritage, history, level of development. And the idea of strengthening ASEAN unity has been a core theme across all of ASEAN's work, whether it's across whether it's across a political security pillar, across a socio-cultural pillar, or across the economic pillar. And we have forged all the institutional mechanisms to do this. So this is a great strength which we must preserve. And borrowing from, a phrase from the Indonesian state motto, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, the old Javanese, which means unity in diversity. I think ASEAN can build from this unity to the next step, which is how do we harness synergy, harness strength out of this diversity. And it will be a very important aspect. Let me share a very interesting story. In May 2019, I was invited to open the Maybank Women's Eco Weavers Meet Southeast Asian Artists exhibition. And this exhibition was held at the National Museum. So Maybank's chairman, Dato' Mohaini Shamsuddin, and the CEO, Dato' Farid, both came to Singapore for the opening, invited me, and I had a very nice lunch with them after that. So I asked both of them, I said, great idea for you to do this Eco Weavers exhibition in Singapore. But may I ask, why Singapore? So both turned to me and said, because Singapore is the only country without Eco Weavers. And we didn't want to leave out Singapore. So we thought, okay, but you have a nice national museum, so we might as well exhibit this in Singapore. So I really very much appreciate the fact that they didn't want to leave out Singapore. And okay, so what can Singapore contribute? Well, Singapore can play a supportive role, can play a complementary role. And I think that should enliven our thinking on many of the areas. That out of this diversity, how do we forge strength and unity? How do we make the best of what each of us can do? And how can we complement one another? So I'm very glad that we are able to do that. And I would like to suggest that we should build on that and tackle the 4 big challenges of the future, which is the 4 Ds. The first D is deglobalization. Now, ASEAN integration has been a big plus, but the support for globalization is fraying. I hope that, with ASEAN's own experience about the importance of economic integration, economic development, how integration can promote development, that we make an extra effort to deepen ASEAN integration. And I've been in the trenches negotiating all this agreement. I benefited hugely from my fellow ASEAN colleagues, and I hope that we can continue to strengthen ASEAN as a single market, as a single production base, and think about our future. And in that regard, I'm very glad that ASEAN has not only integrated internally within ASEAN, but ASEAN has now forged trade agreements with Australia, New Zealand, with China, with India, with Korea, with Japan. Now, that sort of integration would be very powerful. I was in Germany recently, and I made a strong pitch. I said we should have an EU-ASEAN agreement. I hope that the European capitals have heard my call, and I hope that we can get something started. So I think, and of course ASEAN is now in the RCEP, the world's largest free trade agreement with 1/3 of the world's GDP and 1/3 of the world's population. And I think in a world where support for globalization is weakening, we should in fact be going the other way, and we find the benefit of this integration and help one another make the structural adjustments which are needed. So that's the first D. The other 2 Ds is really first the digital revolution that is taking place, and we must make fullest use of this digital revolution. And in that regard, I think my 3 fellow panelists can speak way better than me on that. Development Bank of Singapore has now become DG Bank of Singapore. And LD, our serial entrepreneur, has been harnessing digital technology really well for serving people and serving even non-profits. And of course, you have been doing great work in Carroll. So all of you can share a lot about what we can do on this, on this digital, the next D, the digital revolution, and how we can make use of this digital revolution. And in particular, I think AI is going to reshape the world, reshape our work, reshape economic competitiveness in a very significant way. But AI also has important ethical implications, and we got to get the rules of it right to make sure that we harness technology ethically, we harness technology responsibly for the benefit of people. So the other D, which I would like to focus on, is this whole thing about decarbonization. Because I think climate change is real. And if you look at Southeast Asia, our coastline is probably one of the longest among countries. And in particular, Indonesia as a huge archipelago will be facing climate change in a very major way. Singapore as a tiny little island with our little coastline will be inundated, and even running to Bukit Timah Hill will not save us. So I think there's something that we need to do, that we've got to take climate change seriously, and we must then do our best to look at the technology, the measures that we need to take at energy efficiency, at making the energy transition, at exploring from renewable to nuclear. And in that regard, again, Southeast Asia has tremendous opportunities for us to harness this renewable energy, to harness all these new sources. And my dream is that if we have an ASEAN power grid, then we can have power sharing arrangements across the whole of ASEAN. And I think that would make us a lot stronger, a lot more integrated. The trade integration is not it's just a start. That if we can integrate our infrastructure, such as a grid, together, I think it will bring huge benefits to all of ASEAN, as well as to the world, and do our part for tackling climate change and this whole decarbonization that we need to do. And the last big challenge is demographics. Now, the world, many parts of the world are aging very rapidly. China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, even Thailand, all aging very rapidly. But at the same time, many parts of Southeast Asia have a very youthful population. Economists used to talk about a population dividend. Now, we have to think hard that in the age of AI, in the age of robotics, what does a youthful dividend means? If there are Europeans who now talk about a universal basic income because the AI system and the robots will do all the jobs for you, I personally don't think that we will be in that world. What I think is that in the age of AI and robotics, humans will need to have very new skills to learn and complement us as humans. We have to think about very unique abilities that the AI system cannot replace, and we have to learn how to use the AI and robotics much more smartly. And again, all three of my panelists are experts in this area, and I think it'll be very interesting to hear from them how we can harness AI, how we can harness digital technology, and in particular, how we can strengthen ASEAN digital connectivity that will make the whole of ASEAN a lot stronger. And not just ASEAN as a fortress, but really ASEAN as a very open base to link up with all parts of the world. I spoke about free trade agreements, with China, India, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and my hope that can do with EU and the world. In a world that is becoming more fragmented, I think we should be bridge builders. We should build bridges to all parts of the world and make ourselves a trusted and neutral place. So the 10 economies of ASEAN, the 10 countries of ASEAN, can present a vision of what ASEAN can be in the future in terms of the way we interact with one another, the way we respect the diversity in ASEAN, the culture, the history, and what each country chooses to do, but at the same time, harnessing our strengths together. And I think in a world where science, technology, and innovation will play a critical role, that we should again harness all this new ways of doing things and innovate. And a university like SMU can play a very, very useful role in thinking about how we can bring young people together, young and old, and also how we can deepen understanding amongst our people in ASEAN and contribute to a deeper understanding of each other's diversity and turn that diversity into strength. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DPM. You have given us a lot of food for thought. Now, before I turn to the other panelists and also to the audience, if I may, can I follow up with a very quick question? I think in some of your other remarks on other occasions, you mentioned the importance of talent attraction and development. Bringing in the best is critical to Singapore's continued success, but bringing out the best in the people we have is equally important. I'm wondering if you would care to elaborate a little bit on that.
Thanks, Alan. I think, many years ago, when Mr. Filipio was starting this R&D work in Singapore, he had a phrase which at first I used to humor him. I said, Philip, you are maybe schizophrenic. Because Philip used to say, I am pro-foreigner and I'm pro-local. So, because he was, on the one hand, he started this A-star scholarship and, spent hundreds of millions of dollars, because every PhD scholarship that we give out is worth over $1 million, from all the way from undergraduate to a PhD. Today, I'm very glad we have 1,400 such scholars in our research universities, in our A-star research institutes, and in our companies. But at the same time, he also reached out to the best scientists in the world and said, come and help us develop our young scientists. Yeah. So we had someone like Nobel laureate Sidney Bradner, who spent so much of his time in Singapore helping us to nurture our talent. And I think we must adopt that same open approach, that it is very important that on the one hand, as the government elected by the people, it is our responsibility to develop Singaporeans to the best of our ability. And which is why we invested so much in education, and now we invest so much in lifelong learning, in skills future. When I was working with Dr. Tony Tan to set up SMU, we only had 2 universities. Today, we have 7. When I was education minister, I persuaded Prime Minister, at that time Prime Minister Lee, to set up 2 more universities. Because at that time, by the time I became education minister, we had 4, SMU and then SUTD. I persuaded Prime Minister that I think we need 2 more. So we set up SIT and SUSS. And now I'm glad that we're going to have a 7th university, the University of the Arts. So I think developing Singaporeans to the best of our ability in our education system is a very important priority for the government all along. I see Sandra Devi sitting there. Sandra was education correspondent when I was education minister and did quite a number of interviews with me. I think she knew what I was trying to do and portrayed it very, very well. So I think that is something which we must continue to do. But at the same time, we must remember that in a technological age, there's no big prize in being the number 2 search engine or the number 2 app. It is, unfortunately, a winner-takes-all type of economy. If we want to be able to do it, we should have the best people to be on our side, to work together with us as a team. And given Singapore's origin as a nation, that we are multiracial, multicultural, multi-religious nation, my greatest hope is that Singaporeans growing up in this environment can be the powerful bridge, the powerful connector across different parts of the world, and be very open to understanding the world, rather than to say, well, you are threatening my job. And my personal belief that if somebody can do a better job than me, I'll rather that somebody does the job, and I'll be happy to be in a reserve, because I think the success of our company, the success of our nation matters more than our personal success. And so in the same way, if we can learn from the best from around the world, let us be very open to getting the best to be in Singapore.
Thank you very much. SMU will definitely do its part in strengthening Team SG, but we do need more space, DPM. My bad.
I hear that, and that was 25 years ago. So I will leave SMU to think of creative solution. You have great innovators in this room, on the panel in this room. Think about how you can dig underground, above ground. But by the way, that is one of the challenges that I, as chairman of National Research Foundation, have set my team. Because I say, let's tackle the key constraints of Singapore. And one big constraint is land. So how do we we must always think of turning a disadvantage into an advantage. We were so short of water, but now we have 4 taps for our water. And my hope is that as we meet these challenges, we turn everything into a plus. For instance, this green energy transition is going to be existential for many countries. We will have to do it. And my hope is that we can turn that into a plus for Singapore and for the world. So think about it. Maybe set this as an exam topic for your SMU students.
Thank you.
Or as a project.
Can I now please turn to Piyush to share your thoughts on Southeast Asia, our shared future?
Right, thanks, Alan, and thank you, DPM. You know, I'm not going to repeat what Jamie said and DPM said about our economic, successes, but I will reflect on a couple of them and then ask the question of why, what's caused this. First, we think about our economies, right? Last 45, 50 years, we've succeeded in at least 3 avatars. In the 70s and 80s, mostly the manufacturing base. And the Americans brought in a lot of investment into the region. Post-Plaza Accord, the Japanese brought in a lot of investment in the region into most of our countries. And therefore, as a producer, we did really well, the region on the whole. And then towards the turn of the millennium, we did really well in a new avatar, which was as a consumer. The rise of the middle class, the creation of wealth, and the growth of domestic markets and cross-border markets in the region was actually an extremely important driver of growth. And the third avatar that we've been through is the connector, which is, I call it a third avatar, but in reality, it's a 2,000-year-old avatar. So connecting, China into India and Middle East, connecting the East to the West, our trade and logistics systems, etc., have been a big part of what's driven our growth. So in all of these 3 avatars, we've done relatively well. So you've got to step back and say, so what was special about Southeast Asia? Was it just geolocation that allowed us to do so well? Obviously, some of it was we've gone through 50 years since 1970 of geopolitical stability. So we weren't fighting wars, we were cohesive. I do think the couple of things DPM mentioned were true. One is the institutional mechanisms. I think we did put in some institutional mechanisms as a Southeast Asian community, ASEAN, but you have to recognize that we are not EU. We never put in the institutional mechanisms of Brussels, which by the way is a good thing. I'll come back to that. But it's not that we went overboard and created an entire regulatory framework and a pan-Southeast Asian ASEAN framework and so on. So the trade and tariffs in particular have been helpful. But I could argue that when you think of other kinds of non-tariff barriers, people, mobility, etc., our ASEAN philosophy has always been bilateral. So we will let every country go at its own pace, and therefore we have some institutional mechanisms, but not all. Later, when my young colleagues talk, they will tell you about the number of challenges they still face when they try to go country to country within Southeast Asia. The other thing which I think we've done well, but again, not as well as you can imagine, is an enabling infrastructure. So again, DPM talked about wanting to create an ASEAN power grid. We don't have one. But even if you look at the rest of the infrastructure in the region and say, what is the common shared infrastructure? Some of it exists, but even in fundamental things like a digital infrastructure, a digital backbone, a common identity system, a payment system, is there and not quite there. So if you step back and say, if it wasn't institutional arrangements, if it wasn't enabling infrastructure, what caused the region to really do well and succeed, I would argue one of the biggest things has been the people and the businesses. Sometimes when I'm being cheeky and I don't have a DPM sitting next to me, I say Southeast Asia grows at night when the governments are asleep. I'm being cheeky, DPM, but my point is more generally that when you go back and say...
Piyush is so comfortable with me that now I'm not sleeping and then he says that.
But it's really been the fact that we have a shared cultural history. There's a lot of alignment. You were talking earlier about everybody in Southeast Asia all like fried food, for example, and thought of that one. But I think it's been the fact that our people have been able to move the needle in individual, private sector sense, whether it's SMEs or large companies and so on, they've been able to move the needle and make a difference. Now, if that is the case, then as we think about our shared future, we really got to say not only do we have to continue to make improvements in the areas where I think there's room, institutional arrangements and mechanisms, but we really should double down on our strength. And so that gets to the question, I had an interview with Sandra a couple of days ago, around people, talent, and people-to-people growth. So to be our future is closely bound with what can we do about empowering our people, creating a large talent pool, and continue to create a differentiation on the back of that big strength. We have the power of demography, young people, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, obviously the couple of aging countries like Singapore. But as a collective, we have, an average age of 26 or 27. The US is high 30s, Europe is in the 40s. We have a digitally native population. All of this is born, everybody is just digitally native. We have some of the greatest creativity and some of the best startup ideas coming from our region. How do we actually take these and multiply? And so to multiply, you got to go to the talent equation. Then when you look at talent, I have to say that we haven't done a great job. So the good news, of course, is that we have people like these young people coming and, some of the stuff Deepan talked about. The bad news is look at the data. We have 17% tertiary educated students in the region, right? Again, Europe, US, 40%. Even if I look at all the people who have a tertiary enrollment right now, it's high 20s, about 30%. So I'm not saying tertiary education is all that you should look at, but it's one barometer. So how many of our young people are actually getting access and opportunity and this thing to be able to go through higher education? I think there's an opportunity to do more there. I think there's a challenge in supply and in demand. Supply, we don't have that many great universities. So there's 7 Southeast Asian universities in the top 200 of the QS rankings. Right? Now you could argue 7 is not bad, but we should have a lot more universities for 650 million people. Right? That's a drop in the ocean. So how do we scale up and build a more robust system of education? We have fantastic practical education in Singapore, ITs, polytechnics. We don't have that in other parts of the region. How could we take that and create capability and skill building at a level that would allow us to benefit from this people-to-people agenda and idea? I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more there. From a demand standpoint, a lot of the education obviously is in country, affordability being a criteria. But even of the cross-border population, the kids who go overseas, less than 10% circulate within Southeast Asia. 90% go mostly to the US and Europe and Australia and so on. So how do we actually create a bigger mobility pool for people? One of the challenges is post-education jobs. So can we do something about that? Can we do something? And we have some, don't get me wrong, we have some arrangements. There's a, the Ministers of Education organization gets together. There's a few, ASEAN Secretariat has put in place a few mechanisms, but we don't maximize on that, whether through exchange programs, transfer programs, cross-accreditation programs, et cetera, to be able to create this focus on building our own talent, building our own timber for the region. I think there's more. The second part of this, where I'm speaking to our own book as an educational institution, but I'm convinced that a lot of the problems of the region are peculiar to the region. I mean, some of them are global problems. Technology is shifting, climate change is coming. But Southeast Asia has a unique take on many of these issues. On both ends of the spectrum. What do I mean by that? Sustainability is a big issue. Climate change is a big issue. Use of fossil fuels is obviously a big issue. It's a global problem. But when you're sitting in Southeast Asia, and you recognize that the condition and starting of conditions of Southeast Asia are very different, right? And so whether you're in Myanmar or whether you're in Indochina or Vietnam or Indonesia, if you want to wish away fossil fuel and coal and do it overnight, it's not going to happen. So you're going to start with a state, our starting position is different, so we're going to look for a different set of solutions. With the same end goal, but need to look for a different set of solutions. Similarly, on the whole notion of digital and AI, etc., just language is a big barrier. So you cannot use a common language and say, I'm going to drive it. You've got to look for a different set of solutions. The LLMs might even have to be different. If our problems are big problems the same, but the smaller problems are different, then I do think that we need to do a lot better in finding our own solutions, which is better applied research. So we have good education institutions, we do good research, but most of our research tends to be basic research, and most of it tends to be global publication. How do you get our research published in the US and Europe? Whereas we have a massive agenda and a massive opportunity to help improve the applied research that our own universities do, our own students do, our own PhD do, to build that talent base and build the accompanying solution set that we can for our region. So I'll stop there, Alan. I'm happy to dwell a little bit more on this, but the gist of my comments is that building talent, building education, building people-to-people exchange, building our own applied research, it's a huge area of opportunity for us, and we need to focus on that.
Thank you so much. Piyush, I do have a question for you, but please let me turn to our two panelists first, and then we can start a conversation. Aaron, would you like to take the floor?
Thanks, Alan. For myself, I don't have too much policy kind of experience in that sense, but I'll share my experience in terms of operating across the Southeast Asian markets in that sense, right? So we are now into our 9th year as a company. We are present across many parts of Southeast Asia. There's 11 countries in Southeast Asia in total, and then we are in 6, right? In fact, 90% of the population we sort of cover, right? So we are broadly in Indonesia, we're in Vietnam, we're in Myanmar, right? Of course, in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, right? So 6 countries that we're in, and I would say that across the 6 countries itself, there are extremely different ways of managing the companies, the people, and stuff as we hire them. Just a case in point, a programmer that we bring on in Thailand will be extremely different from the programmer that we bring on in, say, Singapore, which is extremely different from the programmer that you bring on in, say, in Indonesia, right? And we have learned and grown to realize that every country is a little bit different. So every time we enter a new country, when we bring on board people, we always make it a point to actually understand how the people work best locally, culturally, so that we can bring the best out of our people, right? In that sense, and that's actually extremely important, because sometimes when I enter a new market, I'll give you an example, right? So we started in Thailand, I want to say maybe 2-3 years into the company, right? So as a company, we're based in Singapore, we have no choice, we have to get out, right? Literally on year 1 of the business, we entered Indonesia. Second year, after Singapore, second year we went to Indonesia. The third year we went to Thailand. And in that order, right, I think we went into more and more markets. But when I went to Thailand, I think what was very shocking was the culture of, they just do not like to say no to you, right? Literally, it's like, the case was a salesperson or a customer service person, right? He did a very bad job, and for that matter, the manager, all he did was, oh, you did a bad job today, right? And stuff like that. And that guy just took it like this. He didn't say anything to the manager. The next day, he just didn't appear for work. Wow. He just plain out didn't appear for work. And then I asked my HR person, what happened? Oh, he says, oh, this is normal. This is Thailand for you, right? They never say no, right? In that sense, actually, to be fair to them, the Thais are very polite. So in that sense, they are non-confrontational. They don't tell you no, in that sense. So then since then onwards, we learned that, okay, in Thailand, whenever we have to deal with the local people there, we have to be careful and be sensitive to their us, in that sense, their feelings, right? So, which is very different than in Singapore, right? To be very honest, in Singapore, we just tell it the way it is, right? If you can take it, you take it. If you can't take it, too bad. It's also very different from the labor law standpoint, right? In every single country is extremely different. I think in Singapore, we have, in my opinion, some of the best labor laws. As a businessman, I actually like and I actually promote Singapore's labor laws in that sense. I think it's balanced, it's good. Whereas if you look into other geographies, let's not name the specific countries itself, it can get very different, right? For instance, letting off one person in that sense in, say, in XXX country, maybe as as onerous as is if you just let the person stay in the company, right? Let me give you an example. There was a case whereby we were in this country, all right, and then this guy literally stole from the company. All right, he stole from the company, and after he stole from the company, we asked him to leave. The best part was that 3 months later, we got a complaint, a formal lawsuit in that sense from the Ministry of Manpower, right, in that relevant country, and that lawsuit was, you have you have without cost, right? So basically, you have fired this guy without cost. So now give me compensation, and that compensation amount, by the way, was for a year, right? So stuff like that. So it's different kind of laws and stuff like that, and so that's where we learned that actually going to every single country, we have to go in eyes wide open. But I would love to see more in the sense of how can we do more in terms of even just simply leveling out the regulations, right? Simple basic stuff like, say, for instance, manpower, right? How do we share a more common kind of manpower regulations laws across the markets? I think that would be good, right? Quite basic wages, of course, not so straightforward, but that's also one part of stuff itself, right? I think technology itself is also a big sector altogether. That, research is one thing, but how do you ensure systems and stuff and not talk to each other, right? The common middleware, as we call it in the technical terms, so stuff like that. Anyway, there's a lot of things, and I wish that really, if we can get in touch, get this whole shared future together with ASEAN, I think it will be a great success story for us, and definitely a future growth engine for Singapore and for the rest of ASEAN.
So, Adam, can I take over your role and ask a question? So, you could have started in Germany or the United States, but you chose to stick to Southeast Asia. Obviously, there's something you said that this is more likely to be successful than going to Brazil, USA,
That's
or
correct.
Germany. Why?
Yeah. So, Piyush, I did my undergrad and my postgrad after SMU. I did it in Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. So, and in fact, what was not rightly known is that I actually worked in the US for many years, right? And when I wanted to start a company, I always remember this. And I was working in Singtel, by the way. I was in the fund for Singtel, and I remember talking to the CEO at the point in time, Ms. Chua, right? And then she was saying it's about the difference about being a big fish in a small pond, and the difference in being a small fish in the ocean in that sense. And so I thought about it. And similarly for me, I've grown up in Singapore all my life, right? Apart from the times that I studied in abroad. But I would dare say that, in Southeast Asia, I understand Southeast Asia, right? I know Southeast Asia. I have friends. If I ever need to call someone in the ministry for that sense, doesn't matter which one, I know roughly who I can get second or third degree to someone, right?
That is my point.
Yeah.
That, even though the laws are different, labor laws are different, manpower is different, but the people-to-people connectivity gives us comfort around our region. And that's what we need to try and build off, Cherish. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to, Alan,
Please.
your job is so interesting that we all want to take over. I had a follow-up question from Piyush or Aaron, which is that when you said that they're all programmers, so in terms of technical skills, the way that you program will be very similar, right? But the differences is really in the cultural one. And your comment reminds me that many years ago when I was in the Ministry of Trade Industry, people were complaining that ASEAN was opaque, was this and that. Then I met a businessman who said, actually, that is great for me. And I said, why? He said, well, if it is so difficult to navigate and you are the one to understand what these rules are and how to operate, you have a big advantage because all your competitors have been kept out because they have not gone through the difficulty of coming through. Yeah. And you are from SMU, right? Yeah. Did SMU teach you all those difficult things?
Just say yes, Aaron.
Yes, it did.
Okay, this time,
I think even more difficult stuff.
Yes.
No, that should be part of SMU's course, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That is going to be. Well, I'm talking to the provost now. There will be a great job that if you build this deep understanding of our region, it is another source of competitive advantage.
Absolutely. Raising our students' technology quotient is important, but equally important would be what may be called a cultural sensitivity quotient. Right. That too is important. Audi, over to you.
Okay, thank you. This is super interesting listening to everyone. I wanted to build on Deputy Prime Minister's point about strengthening ASEAN unity. And I want to share my experience in two industries, which is the movie industry and also the healthcare industry, two industries that are very different. I don't know a doctor who also is a movie director, at least at this moment. So I believe that in order for us to really strengthen unity, we should really focus on two things for these industries. One of them is shared stories, and the other one is shared friendships. And here's what I mean by shared stories, right? So I recently watched this movie called Making a Million Before My Grandma Dies. Yeah, it's a Thai movie, right? I was very close to my grandma, so the family values that was shown in that movie was very relatable. But also the movie had different elements, the rituals of dying, of inheritance, of family gatherings were different in how it looked, but it had the same underlying feeling of how important family is, right, in that movie. So I'm on the board of this movie company called Vicinema, and we were at that point making this movie about taking a home loan. It's called Home Sweet Loan. It's on Netflix now.
It makes it sound like dying. It's not that bad.
Yeah. No, Home Sweet Loan. Yeah, no. Home Sweet Loan is a movie about like a millennial or Gen Z person who's a sandwich generation and can't earn enough to support his family and herself. And I think a lot of people in ASEAN suffer the same fate. So when we were making that movie, one of the things that we discussed after watching the Making a Million Before Grandma Dies, how do you make it relevant for not only Indonesian audience, but for at least an ASEAN audience? Right, so in that movie, we tried to show the same things, the rituals about living together in a big family compound, right? Having to support your brother who needs a loan for his medical bills and things like that. These are very common things that happen in ASEAN, but maybe less so in Western countries. But what we learned in the movie industry is actually we haven't really seen many movies that are pan-ASEAN, right? The Thai movie that was successful that I mentioned was a rare occasion. Right? It actually doesn't happen very often. So I feel like this is one industry where we could have collaboration from two sides. Like one is from the Higher Education Institute. Right now we look at Korea as one of the hallmarks of a great cinema industry. And that started from a university, from KFA, right, in 1984, where the Parasite director and everybody came together. So imagine if we had a school or an academy where ASEAN directors would work together. Just by being together, they would create stories that we could share across each other. And the second is with companies. Pius was saying about how DBS had this movie that has 1 billion views, you're saying, right? And I think that helped the company also build a brand beyond an advertisement. So I would like to see more ASEAN companies actually sponsor movies across ASEAN. So we launched Home Sweet Loan actually in Singapore as well, actually finally, and it did okay. Not as spectacular as the Grandma movie, but it's something that we want to do more in V Cinema, right? And the second part is about friendships. Now, like you said, there's not that many mobility, right, across ASEAN. Maybe 10% of people kind of move around. And some of that is actually by design, right? If I'm in the healthcare industry, I'm on the board of this company called Halodoc, right? And healthcare is one of the industries where it's really difficult. You can't get a degree in one country and work in another country, right? It's hard. But as I was in Halodoc and as I was investing in clinics, we learned that actually there's one common thread across healthcare, which is healthcare management. Now that actually can be shared across country. So one of the experiments that actually myself and SMU did through the Overseas Center was we did a session where we brought a professor from SMU, Professor Chen, Dr. Chen, and myself to hold a session to invite Indonesian clinic owners, in this case, to actually learn about the best practices from Singapore and the region. And when we did it, I was actually worried that people wouldn't come, because for the first 1-2 weeks, nobody registered. But the day of the event, it was actually, we were over capacity, right? There was such a hunger from these clinic owners and from people in the industry, especially the people who are in the medical sector, because they're very isolated to the country, to learn from best practices across the region. Now imagine if we had more programs. I think SMU has a program, which is the Advanced Certificate in Healthcare, right? For health management, right? And if we had more programs where health leaders could learn together in a setting, because to be honest with you, right now, most people when they come to me, they say, "Oh, I didn't realize that we have this in ASEAN. I thought that I would have to go to the Mayo Clinic, or I have to go to Harvard, right, to do these kinds of programs." And I feel like this is something that is at the moment under-leveraged, right? Because honestly, the best way to build a shared future is not only but from shared stories, but shared friendships. So my experience when I was building payments in Southeast Asia was we had a company in Vietnam, in Thailand, and in Philippines. And the things that stayed together now, even like years after I left the company, is the moments when we had lunch in each country, right? The lunch breaks in Manila was filled with Jollibees, for example. The lunch breaks in Thailand was filled with explorations of different cuisines, some fried, And in Singapore, it was a very efficient lunch, more so, right? But these connections and these friendships that you make are actually it's what's gonna propel our region to have a shared future. So I would really, beyond the shared infrastructure, I would really advocate for having more shared movies, shared stories. With Netflix, it's easier now. And also more opportunities for programs where we can build shared friendships because ultimately it's the human-to-human connection that will connect our region together more so than any digital or regulatory connection.
Thank you very much. I forgot to mention that Audi is also a member of SMU's International Advisory Council. So thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Let me turn to my
Can I ask
fellow
him another
moderators.
question?
Of course.
So already before we came on the panel, he said one of his lessons, I'm going to put you on the spot, after having done GoPay and so on, is that he's not going to create a new regional business.
Yes.
So obviously a learning was it's not that easy to go regional in Southeast Asia, right? What can we learn from that? What can we take away?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think the first part that's hard in the region is actually navigating through the regulation, right? I think I've been in regulated industries, right? Fintech through GoPay and Halodoc, right? When you have multiple regulators to deal with, it's very difficult because they are the most important person in that country. And you have to respect that because it is their country and they are the ones who set the rules and you have to live by those rules. But when you're a company, it's actually not easy in a regular environment to actually build a common infrastructure across the two. I think the second is partnerships. I think partnerships work very differently in different countries. Every country has a different business group leader, different environment. And so making sure that you understand how to navigate that is also like a big challenge. And the last is actually just the team, right? As a leader, I mean, when I started GoPay, I was like super inexperienced, like severely underqualified, basically, to build that. And trying to learn how to be a leader across different people with different values was something that's not easy, right? I think some cultures like value efficiency. Some cultures like Indonesia value personal touch, right? In the Philippines, relationship also matters a lot. And so I feel like these differences make it difficult for ASEAN to build a pan-ASEAN business. That's why, for example, in Halodoc, we've decided to kind of stay really integrated domestically. But I do believe that it's possible, right? For example, one good example is the QR payments, right? Right, so that's something that it was like really one of our babies, right? We worked together on this, is that now we can actually, today we paid with QR in a 7-Eleven. And for me, that was an example of where this can happen. So I'm not pessimistic about it. I just think that we need to build that infrastructure where degrees can be transferable, right? Where people can work around, payments can be done together, integrations can be done easier between healthcare providers so that we can actually work together.
I think, Audi, the point about friendship really resonated with the audience. Actually, come to think of it, you might be interested to note that the early usage of the Chinese term for friends, 朋友, actually meant people studying together. So I guess the question is, how do we then encourage more of our Southeast Asian young people coming together to learn? How can we ensure that they have the access, as Piyush has mentioned, and the opportunity? DPM, any thoughts on promoting Southeast Asian higher education?
I think that's excellent. First, let me say that I'll have a quick comment on what LD just said. I'm very happy to hear that you are now into movie making and making this movie, because I do think that movie has a very important way to showcase our common humanity. You know, whether you are parents worried about your child and so on, it is common across the whole world. And at the same time, there's a lot of cultural nuances in different societies. And for us to be able to appreciate those cultural nuances, movie making is such a valuable part of it. So you're doing something really useful. And your point about the diversity in ASEAN and how we can turn it into a strength, when I was running our central bank, we always have ASEAN Central Bank meetings in different capitals. And one of the very memorable one was actually in Indonesia. We went to Lombok for a bilateral meeting with central bank governor. And then subsequently, we had a meeting in Cambodia. And the Cambodian Central Bank decided to host us at Angkor Wat. And with a dinner and dance performance in Angkor Wat under the moonlight. It was so magical. And you begin to appreciate what it is, you know, that we went there about 5 o'clock, did a tour, and then after that followed by dinner in Angkor Wat. And it was so magical. So I think bringing out the cultural diversity of ASEAN, turning it into a strength, promoting ASEAN tourism to deepen understanding of the world of ASEAN and among ASEAN will be so valuable. Yeah. So on your question, Alan, on what can we do for education? First, I think not just in higher education, but I think across our whole education system, we should do that. Yeah. I should mention that when I was education minister, we have different pots of funds for sending students abroad for overseas exposure. Then my teachers came to me and said, Minister, you need to transfer money from the Asia pot to the American pot. I said, why? He said, all the kids wanted to go to America. I said, why America? He said, well, the kids love to go to Disneyland. Well, now whatever may be the truth, and some parents were very particular that it's better to send the kids to sort of developed countries where good healthcare, medical, and so on. I refused to change that pot, and I said, no, I want you all to make full use of that because we must understand our most immediate neighbor and that our children must grow up understanding. But at the tertiary level, we now have lots and lots of these exchange programs, and I think we should do more. SMU itself is very good. I mean, you have SMU internship, ASEAN internship, you have Open Overseas Center in a few places, I think Jakarta, Bangkok, and Ho Chi Minh City, and they can do more. NUS has its overseas college in Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And at the same time, we have opened this Global Innovation Alliance, where it's an initiative that we started when I was doing the future economy to look at how we can make Singapore an innovation node, connected to innovation nodes around the world. And we started a Global Innovation Alliance, where we have centers in Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City, Jakarta, and Manila. So all these are opportunities, and all of you know the ASEAN region very well. Piyush is now the SMU chairman, so Piyush can do more on this area. So I think I will fully endorse that we need to promote more exchanges and learning across the different groups of people, whether they are young in the school, whether they are university undergraduates, whether they are postgraduates, whether they are already working. I think that exchange will always be useful. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, if you will indulge me to just one final question before I open the floor for questions, I'd like to ask Piyush, for selfish reasons, because I have to do my to-do list now as the incoming provost. You mentioned that SMU should become the quintessential Asian university. Would you care to elaborate?
Actually, the honest truth, I didn't think too much about what it meant when I said it, but I thought a lot about it after because people asked me. But yes, the two or three things which I think, to my mind, define quintessential. So one is Asian, right? If you step back, and I know you come from, now premier universities in Hong Kong, etc., but I think of the parallel to DBS. When I joined DBS, it just seemed to be that there was no identified pan-regional Asian bank, which was deemed as the Asian powerhouse. The Hong Kong banks were in Hong Kong, the Taiwanese were in Taiwan, the Chinese banks weren't in the region, the Japanese weren't. So I figured there's an opportunity for somebody to position themselves as a preeminent pan-Asian representative, right? And over the years, I think we've been able to create that kind of niche. I think the same is true in education. That everything notwithstanding, there's a position for somebody to position themselves as the preeminent pan-Asian face. And I think, including with the overseas centers, trying to look at a broader than Singapore remit, trying to solve Asia's problems, we do have the opportunity to position as a pan-Asian, or certainly ASEAN university, that's one. But to me, the quintessential thing, there's a little bit more than that. When I thought about it very soon, I was not just even thinking about the origins of Oxford, Cambridge, I was going all the way back to Nalanda. If you think about the nature of Nalanda between 300 BC and 800 AD, it was 10,000 people, as big as SMU is today. It had dormitories and so on. It had the same classic square and people came and lived there. But the people who came there came from Indian China, from Indonesia, from Southeast Asia. It was a very eclectic base of students. And the bulk of the work they did was applied. They were trying to teach people how to live their life and how to put that into application. So to me, if you go back to history, the role of a university is not just creating knowledge, but applying knowledge, disseminating knowledge. That's a quintessential university to me. And if I think about the role a good quintessential university can do, it can actually do a lot more application work. SMU has made a name for itself, as I said, being applied in the education space. Our students are job ready, more job ready. Our students therefore more demanded, and that's good. But when I think of research, making a difference to society, to make impact in the region, finding solutions, I think we have some way to go. And so to me, apart from the Asian agenda, it is this. How do you get an application-oriented university that stands out for the solutions it looks for actually being embedded in the real day-to-day living of people and the solutions that they need?
If I could say that when you started answering the question, it was a confession that I actually didn't know what I was saying about quintessential Asian university. Let me remind you that a confession made in front of a police officer is admissible in court. But I noticed that as you started speaking, you became more and more enlightened. So I think SMU should teach this enlightenment about Nalanda University. But I fully support what you said. That I think, when I go to Europe, we always think of Europe as the EU and so on as one big entity. But actually, Europe itself is hugely diverse, not just in the different languages, but in the culture, in the way of doing things. And the same can be said of Asia. And I think promoting that deep understanding across culture, across countries, will be so important for our future collaboration. And it also enriches our life. That no point all seeing the same Hollywood movie, right? That you should have a very different exposure to life.
Well, we do have the Bodhi tree on our campus.
You do? Oh, wow. So Piyush office will be there.
Aaron, Audi, any further thoughts before I invite the audience to join us in this conversation? Please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you very much for enlightening us. My name is Harry Tong. I'm a retiree, and I'm interested in education. I'm also interested in geopolitics. Now, as far as education is concerned, DPM, you have mentioned about offering scholarship, making people to come. And if I'm not wrong, not too long ago, we used to have a lot of Malaysians at our junior colleges through ASEAN scholarship, right? And I think this educational, whether it's given out as a form of freebie or whether it's very good in generating all the different people at ASEAN to be together. And whether they continue to work in Singapore or not, in the subsequent years, there is a sort of a kinship and fellowship, okay? But that is not my main question. My main question is on ASEAN at the fringes, which I think very little has been discussed on right now. And of course, when we talk of fringes, we talk of Myanmar. What is actually happening? What is being done? And how then do we get them to come on board? Because if we do remember, in the past, there was the Pol Pot.
More succinct.
In the past, it was the Pol Pot regime in which ASEAN took a sort of a hands-off kind of approach and allowed whatever going on in that country to carry on. Now, my concern is Myanmar. Is it still part of ASEAN? Are we doing anything overtly, covertly? What can be done, and how then do we bring that before we can even have a more shared future? That is my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any response? I mean, obviously, it's a very complex situation that does not allow for any simplistic answer. Huh?
I'll just add my point of view from a businessman standpoint. We are quite lucky in the sense that it's not that we are purposely doing things to help in that sense, but we were actually doing this because Thailand borders Myanmar, right? And actually during the time of the coup, we were actually quite lucky from the standpoint that I took a whole tech team out of from Myanmar itself, and we still kept quite a bit of them in Myanmar by choice. In that sense, well, I think I'll first of all answer by saying Myanmar is not in that bad a state. right? Depending on who you ask, of course, right? Some of them will argue that it's terrible, some of them will say and stuff like that. I do not know too much about the politics side of stuff, but I can tell you from a business standpoint, it's actually okay and it's running fine, right, in Myanmar. Because we do have an office in Myanmar and it's still functioning properly. But that said, there's a good group of people from Myanmar who already left, and then they're all staying in Thailand and stuff and whatnot, right? So I think, and that's all okay. I think various ASEAN countries, especially Thailand, has done their part in taking a lot of the Burmese immigrants, right, or refugees now in Myanmar, right? So on that note, I do think that it's not as bad as what I just said, which is, ASEAN's not doing anything and stuff. I think Thailand, for that standpoint, is doing a lot. And I do see a lot of, I think there's a lot of ease of movements between Burmese today, by the way. Even though, so to speak, the consulate is not open, maybe. They are still running around, right? In fact, I just met my CTO, by the way, is Burmese, and I just met him last week in Myanmar, in Malaysia, right? So in that sense, life goes on, it's still okay. It's not that bad. Yeah.
I can probably add that I have very fond memories of my stay at the University of Yangon as a visiting professor under the sponsorship of the ASEAN University Network. So if you talk to the young people in Myanmar, they are just as hungry for knowledge and development, just like anybody else in Southeast Asia or beyond.
Well, actually, for many years, ASEAN have been working together on this initiative for ASEAN integration, because recognizing that the original ASEAN 5, ASEAN 6 have been a lot more developed, and we do need to lend a hand to the rest of ASEAN. And that initiative has been going on for many years. But the coup takes it in a very different direction. And in fact, our MFA has been working together with other MFAs to make sure that there are certain norms of behavior which we expect without interfering too far into the domestic affairs of countries. So it is, it is a statement which one of my colleagues said many years ago, that if you think about ASEAN as an entity, if you look at it in a short term, it can be very frustrating because things don't move quickly, things don't change like that. But over the long term, it changes. And I think it is important for all of us to make sure that we set certain norms and that we nudge these changes. And every society will change at its pace. And I see that things can get better if we focus on how we continue to engage in ways that we can, because it is quite a tragedy to see so many millions of people, plunged backwards instead of going forward.
Thank you. I see there are already people lining up at the mics, but before that, I would particularly like to encourage our young students among us to see if they have any questions they would like to ask. A gentleman in the middle.
Yeah, my name is Subramanian. It's a very good theme, we have got a shared future, okay? And I would like to coming to the numbers, the bread and butter question. Say, for example, Singapore has got a per capita of 94,000, whereas Myanmar has got just 1,800 around. So how is it that, as a shared future, are we going to do something at least to bring that 1,800, something around 2,500 or something like that? So you cannot bring it as close to Singapore's USD per capita, which is 94,000. But what is that we can do in order to bridge the gap, at least to some extent, to bring it up, from 1,800 to 2,500 or 3,000, something like that. That's number one. Number two, my question is that just last week I have been to Jakarta. Now we are talking about contactless payments, but when you give my DBS card to the Alphamart or the Indomart, is hard coding my card number into the system. The entire card numbers are being coded, now which of course nobody is supposed to do, but that's what they're saying, unless I do it, I can't process your card for paying the bills. So how are we going to bridge the gap, in terms of technology, between Indonesia or for Singapore or any other country? Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, yes, payments. So I understand what you mean. I think just technically what happens is a lot of people who have stores, they actually encode the card numbers. Usually it's for fraud purposes, right? And so what they do is they use it for a record and they want to basically retain the customer or use it to detect fraud. But actually in Jakarta, the most dominant form of payments right now is actually QR payments. I think very few people use cards right now. I think we have 40 million merchants or so already live on the QR payment system. And I think when the payment system is a shared QR, it enables people from every bank to use it, right? Now, the issue technically with the credit cards is because not many people use it. Unfortunately, the infrastructure is not there. Now, what I would like to see in ASEAN is actually the ease of moving money between countries is still not that easy in comparison, right? In comparison, I think well, the ability for us to actually do remittance and cross-border transactions, I think, is something that I think we can still improve on.
Thank you. The lady in the middle, please, and then followed by the other lady on top. Please, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the talk, by the way. I'm Kanis Teo. I'm representing Nanyang Polytechnic. And this question is in particular to Mr. Aldi regarding media. So regarding that part about that you said about the importance of shared experiences and using media as a way to form a sort of kinship and understanding between people in Southeast Asia, you said that South Korea is currently like the powerhouse of media. And this is quite shocking because stereotypically Asian countries have always been focused on business, healthcare, and technology. And I was wondering how we might integrate, since you talked a lot about integration in your forum, how we might integrate Korea's media strategy into advancing this agenda of shared experiences and connecting people in ASEAN through media.
Okay, so I took a lot of time to learn about how Korea became so dominant, right? And it didn't happen overnight. It was actually a very deliberate strategy. So the university was when it all started, when the directors started to learn about how to make world-class movies. And then the second part that I haven't mentioned is the importance of the chaebols, the business groups, in actually sponsoring and investing in these movies. So the combination of the academy, KFA, and the chaebols investing in this industry was a 30-year growth of how an industry formed from basically very kind of young to now a very mature. So I actually met a Korean executive who was buying a movie chain in Indonesia. This was like almost 15 years ago. And I asked him like, hey, why would a Korean company buy a movie cinema chain in Indonesia? And he told me that because in about 10 years, a Korean movie is going to win the Oscars, right? And I thought he was just, crazy, right? But it happened, right? It really happened. And I think that's something that we can do together in ASEAN. I think we can be deliberate about setting up an institute to make movies together. We have enough wealth in business groups that can actually support movies and actually make it commercially viable. Because if you look at James Bond, right, Aston Martin has leveraged that brand. And it's so iconic, right? And now other brands want to go into James Bond. Movies have a way of entering the zeitgeist of a culture in a much more longer period than a commercial, an ad, right? And I do believe that if we want to have the same result as Korea, we need to be deliberate. And I think the final thing is about Europe. You mentioned about how Europe is now having its moment earlier, right? With making Europe great again now is popular. The thing about Europe is actually, its movie industry is actually relatively integrated. It's much more so than ASEAN. You have Spanish actors in German movies, and because of that, they have a shared culture. Maybe they fought many wars together, and now the borders change all the time, all right? But they do have that shared culture, and I feel like we also have that, and we can do it if we are deliberate as a region in both higher education and through the corporate sector.
Thank you.
Saudi, you will go and make a movie about mega ASEAN. Make Europe great again under ASEAN.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Let me turn to the lady at the back, and then I'll turn to the gentleman on to my left. Sorry, I know that you have been waiting for quite some time. Please.
So good afternoon. Thank you so much for the conversation that you have. There were a couple of key takeaways in your conversations and your topics: diversity, building bridges. So I work for an education company and a publisher. So I've seen how SMU has been very forward-thinking. So SMU has done business cases with BINUS in Indonesia, Chulalongkorn in university in Thailand. But if you go to Ambon in UIN Ambon, which is an Islamic university in Ambon, you see no presence of SMU in there. So my question is around the policies of ASEAN as we talk about diversity, and I'll be very articulate in what I'm going to say. As ASEAN continues to grow as a dynamic and diverse region, how can AI-driven platforms be designed to address inequities in access, because these universities doesn't have content access, language, I think the DBS chairman talks about it, the quality of learning, and especially for the underrepresented communities in less developed countries across the ASEAN region. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any, Piyush?
Actually, as the incoming provost, maybe you should answer that.
Well, I appreciate very much the question. The short answer is, it is always a work in progress. I mean, of course, we want to ensure accessibility of education to as many deserving students as possible. But there are also issues of costs that we need to be mindful of. So in a nutshell, this is not something that I think that can be solved overnight, nor is there any silver bullet that will solve every problem we confront. But let's make no mistake, that is the longer-term goal and ambition that SMU has as a university.
If I can just add to that, I think the answer is in your question. I think the nature of technology, and particularly AI, is game-changing in many areas, and education's one of them. Already, post-COVID, look at the landscape in Singapore. The amount of continuous education that's happening today through Skills Future grants and the Ministry of Manpower handouts is extraordinary compared to what used to happen just 6 years ago. And if you look at our own pedagogy and curriculum, the amount of education we're doing online as opposed to in the classroom is changing every day. So I think digital outreach in education, and then coupled with the power of GenAI to actually customize the education, whether it's language or personalize it n equal to 1, is massive. Some of it will be driven in an organized way, deliberate as you said, but a lot of it is going to be, 1,000 flowers blooming. Because the opportunity space for individual private education enterprises to leverage the technology is huge. 20 years ago in just digital, things like Coursera and Khan Academy made very profitable businesses because they could digitize education, as you know. If you ask me in the next 5 years with AI and Gen AI, you're going to find many more business models which leverage that and take it out to Ambon and to every other part, because technology will let you do it at a much lower cost point and at much bigger scale.
If I could just add one point. I think what is very important for us is to be very clear about what is the problem that we are trying to solve, or what is the solution we're hoping to seek. And I give you a very good example of a company I visited recently. They were using digital technology to work with a village in Indonesia to help to increase the incomes of the farmers. But in order to do that, they first went and studied the entire supply chain. How did the farmer get the seeds, the fertilizers, and so on, and how the farmers were growing. And they found that the problem was that the farmers were not very knowledgeable about rainfall pattern, about the amount of fertilizers they need to use, about the kind of seeds, and the whole supply chain was so inefficient that they decided to work with the village headman and said, we will help you to procure these seeds and fertilizers at source at a much lower cost, and at the same time, we would get every one of them a digital phone, and we will give instructions to the farmers about when you start plowing, how you plow, when you harvest, what is the weather forecast, when you should do. And within the first year, they had the farmers had a 25 to 30% increase in their income because costs went down. And I think applying technology by first understanding what is the problem that we're trying to solve, what is the result we're trying to achieve. And I'll say in that particular case, it was not Gen AI, it was a very simple digital technology, but understanding what was the supply chain and what can be improved.
Please.
Yeah, so I'm Chan. I'm currently a master's student here in SMU pursuing a master's degree in quantitative finance. So from context-wise, many regions around the world have grappled with the challenge of integrating into the global economy, while at the same time maintaining their cultural and societal values. For instance, South Korea has embraced tech advancements and global business practices while still promoting its cultural identity through the Hallyu Korean Wave movement, which has made K-pop, K-dramas, and Korean fashion a global phenomena, including here in Singapore as well. And this has helped South Korea develop like significant soft power while remaining a competitive economic player. Similarly, China has opened up its economy and invested heavily in global trade and tech innovation. Yet it continues to promote policies like common prosperity to ensure economic growth aligns with its domestic social and political values. Meanwhile, Europe, with its diverse nations, has navigated the balance between regional integration through the EU, while still allowing countries to maintain their distinct languages, traditions, and governance
Could you
models.
come to your question, please?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so sorry. So I was reading the time. So, like, in this context, how can ASEAN ensure that the region's unique cultural and societal values are preserved and promoted, even if as it adopts international standards and practices in governance, education, and business?
Any of our panelists would? Or we can take a few more questions first. There's actually a big clock in front of me, and it now says 5 minutes and 8 seconds. So I want to get as many questions and comments as possible. Let me turn to my right, and then I want to give the floor to the two young students behind.
Okay. Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ryan, and I'm a year 2 junior college student in a local junior college. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists for their insightful sharing. My question is, I would love to give the context first. Southeast Asia stands at the intersection of global trade, technological innovation, and geopolitical competition, making it a pivotal player in shaping the 21st century world order. My question is that, given ASEAN's unique model of consensus-driven diplomacy and its strategic balancing between major powers, how can the region move beyond mere economic integration to establish itself as a proactive architect of global norms and governance rather than a passive rule taker? Thank you.
That is a big question. Yeah, the two students behind, please.
Hello,
raise your
I'm
question.
Brendan. I'm also a J2 student. My question would be regarding just now, as you mentioned, of increasing ASEAN's talent pool. Understanding the phenomenon of intra-regional brain drain, where more talented workers move from less developed ASEAN countries to more developed ASEAN countries, how do we mitigate that intra-regional brain drain that might be caused as a result of the disparity? Yeah.
You don't think there could be a win-win situation here?
I believe that there is potential for a win-win situation, but there is also much risk in the situation right now, given that some countries like Singapore are developing much faster than certain countries like Cambodia, which might lead to more talented workers in Cambodia wanting to move to Singapore, where their talents are recognized and properly developed, instead of maybe in their poorer facilities in, yeah.
Let's hear from...
Okay, hi. Okay, thank you panelists for the very insightful discussion thus far. So I'm Dora, I'm also a J2 student from Dunman High, and I was previously volunteering in Indonesia, which got me to think about what are some of the opinions on how, or perhaps to what extent, should Singaporean youth or how the Singapore government can work with other member states of ASEAN with different political ideologies and beliefs, especially with ideologies that we don't agree with. So I think it would be quite interesting if I could possibly hear from different perspectives, like from education or from an economical or like a political standpoint. Thank you.
Any?
Yeah, let me take a quick stab at this. You know, the first one about how do you protect a cultural identity like Korea has or China has as you grow. I actually don't think it's something that we can orchestrate, but I do think that where the world is going gives you some natural possibilities. I think increasingly you're going to see a multipolar world. And people normally talk of that in geopolitical terms. I actually think of that in cultural terms as well. For 30, 40 years, most of the cultural soft power was US out. But the fact today, they're beginning to see China, you're beginning to see Korea, you're seeing some of Japan, you're beginning to see other countries. It tells you that the power of internet and the power of media creation in individual localities is immense. And so as long as you create good content, I think content can travel. So I do think that in technology itself lies some of the answers to how this could happen. I don't know of a better way to orchestrate it. The question on, how does ASEAN lean into global norms and governance, I think that's a really good question. One of the things that frustrates me, and goes back to education, we don't have enough think tanks in Southeast Asia, which is why a large part of the heavy lifting of thinking, thought, still comes from the Western world. It comes from the UK, from the big institutions, comes from the US. This is a big role that universities need to play in our region. Right? So when I talk about applied research, I think I talk about being thought leaders. We actually have to lift our universities and get an education system to actually create thought leadership, coupled with other think tanks. So there's a gap, but there's a role that we can actually fulfill and serve. The third question, which I thought was also very interesting, how do you make sure that everybody is not flocking to Singapore from around the region? And actually, again, so to give you I obviously come from India. In my growing up in India in the 1970s, every engineer from IIT, all the engineering schools, they all went off to the US for a master's and postgraduate, which is why the Silicon Valley is full of them. The number of people going overseas for engineering from Indian IIT schools in the last year has crashed to under 10%. Right? Why is that? Because the opportunity space has changed. So people go where the opportunity is. Right? India is still a poor country. It still doesn't give you the salaries you get in the US. But the opportunity to start up, create, be an entrepreneur, India provides that. So if we can create the same opportunities in our backyard, people will go there. If the biggest opportunity is to create unicorns in Indonesia, Thailand, people will want to go there and stay there. Finally, the question on what can Singapore do to work with other member states? It's not straightforward, and I'm not sure Singapore is very hung up on we only work with countries which share ideology. I think Singapore has been quite pragmatic. We do what's appropriate for us, and we expect other countries to do that as well. I think the related question, which is really more for the DPM than for me, is can Singapore lean in a lot more? It's a political question, because the social politics of the country are always our people, our citizens first. But, it's a heretical thought, DPM, but would Singapore put a $5 billion fund together to sponsor higher education in the region where there is no immediate benefit to Singapore? So all the country regions say the little red dot looks after itself. But here, this would be an investment for 20 years with no immediate, and it would be a bet. It's not entirely clear to me that as a country we're ready for that, because the social politics of our country is our citizens will say, our money, why do we do this? But it's a tricky question, therefore.
I know we are running out of time.
Actually, if I could just add to what Piyush just said. I think first, on your point about what Singapore can do with the region, in fact, under our Singapore Cooperation Program, we've been doing a lot of training. And we don't just do it with Singapore alone. For example, we have a very good collaboration with the IMF on the IMF Singapore Training Institute. We have a very good collaboration with the World Bank. So what Singapore can do is not just Singapore, but how we can partner the best institutions around the world that has an interest in that. So for instance, when we work with the World Bank Infra Hub, we do a lot of work on urban infrastructure and on Infrastructure Asia, also rallying our private sector together to do that. And on the question on the Piyush's answer about brain drain, I think Piyush is absolutely right, that talents will go to where they feel that it is the best place to develop yourself, to grow. But at the same time, I think Singapore has also been doing a lot in the region, because remember, every one of your investments into the region, those of you who are in business, including Piyush, and including in fact all of you here, you hire people, you train them, and that is a very important part of leveling up. And beyond that, when I was finance minister, I'm aware that we run programs, not just to train our own principals, we actually open it to principals on certain countries where we had a collaboration, and that has a big multiplier effect. And many years ago, we started this SMU, Southeast Asian, we have SMU, Southeast Asian Minister for Education, and there is a lot of collaboration. In fact, the building next to Shangri-La is actually teaching English, right? Teaching English as a common language, and they are still doing that work. So I think looking at where are the areas where we can make an impact is important. Yeah. It's not just about money, but how that money is used, where the needs are the greatest, and how we can make our contribution.
I really wish we had more time, but I am thankful for the discussion that we have had. It only leaves me to ask the audience to join me in thanking our panelists.